The film begins in Texas in 1939 with a dark-skinned boy named Bernard, who is shown at the beginning of the film to work as a shoe polisher, and then discovers that it is just a way for him to be constantly in front of the bank. So all of his wealthy white clients, Bernard didn't care about the money he earned from shoe polish. Rather, his plan is to find out the financial secrets that these people talk about, which the young child keeps writing down in a study. We discover that Bernard dreams of becoming a banker, but in his home country where blacks are oppressed because of discrimination, his father sadly tells him that his dream is impossible. 15 years later, the young adult moves to Los Angeles with his wife Eunice and children, and then they settle temporarily in the house of one of his relatives. Bernard begins to work as his real estate agent, and searches for homes for sale everywhere in the city, until he found a building owned by a white man with a garden. But he needed to give him $30,000 at first, and another $5,000 to rent out all the apartments. Although the owner likes his idea, he refuses to do risky work. Bernard expresses his understanding, and before leaving he takes a look at the owner's office calendar that shows he received it from a local bank manager. So an idea comes to his mind. He goes directly to the bank, but the employee refuses to present it to the manager because of discrimination against blacks. Bernard waits for a few hours at the door of the bank, and when the manager comes out he stops him and tells him that he knows one of his special customers and asks him to approve a loan. But the bank manager refuses without thinking. That night he gets a call from the MAC, and the landlord asks him if he used his name to get a loan. Bernard tries to apologize, but the owner surprises him by admiring his determination to achieve his goal. He will be his guarantor for the first loan of his life. The next day, Bernard buys the building. In the next scene, an old white lady returns home. She sees a black man at her door, and in a sharp tone asks him what he is doing there. He calmly replies that he has become the owner and is renovating the building. The old woman became speechless. Then she goes into her house and calls the police. Soon after, 2 officers arrive to check if the new owner of the building is indeed Bernard, presents them with a copy of the certificate of ownership, and they leave after he is sure that the building really belongs to him. That night, Bernard moves his belongings to an apartment in the building. The old lady sees him at the door and is stunned, and then days later leaves because she does not want to live in the same building with black people. Bernard immediately rents the apartment to a black lady, and within a short period of time, Bernard manages to pay the remaining amount to the former king, who admires Bernard's intelligence and offers to start a business together. Bernard chooses the house and calculates the income while the previous owner negotiates the deal and signs the contract because the white people refuse to deal with black people and share the return. So Bernard agrees to the offer, and things go very smoothly. They also earn a lot of money. Bernard also moves with his family to a large house. The rhythm of his life changes after a few years when his business partner dies, and his wife, who does not like black people and refuses to cooperate with Bernard, inherits him and even offers to buy his name contemptuously and at a very low price. If he does not agree, she will sue him. Bernard decides to go to court. But first, he must find someone to testify that he was an accomplice of the previous owner. He thinks about the bank manager and goes to meet him, but he refuses to cooperate with him. Amid the disappointment he feels at being discriminated against, a bold idea comes to his mind. He decides to buy the bank building because then he will not be able to discriminate against him because of the color of his skin. Joe goes to meet another Los Angeles real estate developer with his plans. Joe hesitates at first, but agrees after being convinced of Bernard's idea. Although they can't negotiate transactions with white people directly and need a white person as an agent to appear in the facade, Bernard remembers someone named Matt who is helping him renovate the apartment building and is a very honest and ambitious man. But he's inexperienced, so Bernard and Joe embark on his comprehensive golf training, as in the calculations of real estate appraisals as a young entrepreneur. At the golf club, Matt meets the owner of the bank building at a prearranged appointment by Joe and Bernard, who make sure all the preparations are made, and ask Matt to memorize the numbers and calculations before meeting with the owner. Matt is always one step ahead. It gives the exact number that shocks the owner of the building and the accountant next to him. They are convinced that they are in front of a genius in mathematics. Then Bernard eventually gets the building, which costs more than $2.4 million for $1.56 million. Bernard and Joe's real estate investments expand rapidly, after which Bernard decides to return with his family to Texas to visit his father, who tells him that he is proud of his achievements. The next day, Bernard wanders around the city with his son, until he stands in front of the bank where Bernard worked as a shoe polisher. In his childhood, they meet a young boy who also shines shoes, and Bernard is surprised when the boy tells him that he only shines white shoes. That small incident awakens his sense of responsibility to change the status quo and help the black community in his hometown. The next day, Joe visits and tells him that they should buy the Bank of Texas Joe objects because he realizes that racism in Texas is too severe. Bernard manages to convince him to change his mind. Once again, they enlist the services of Matt, who is interviewed by the bank's owner Robert Florence Sr. and his son, to discuss the numbers of the deal. Despite Florence Jr.'s suspicions, Matt and his partner buy the bank. Bernard immediately sets out to work and begins helping African Americans in the city get loans, fair housing opportunities, and earn money. Florence Jr. receives many complaints, begins an investigation into loans approved by the bank, and proceeds to track Matt until he meets. After leaving, the three partners discuss their next plans. Matt proposes to buy another bank and transfer loans to black people to him. A few days later, Matt receives a call from Florence regarding customers who want to withdraw all their money from Al-Awwal Bank. On the same day, the audit committee visits the new bank to help Matt. Bernard disguises himself as a cleaner so he can enter the bank. Unfortunately, the commission employee discovers problems with many loans, learning that Florence is behind the loan problem. The three partners meet and ask Matt to leave the new bank. The next day, the FBI arrests Bernard and Joe, and when they meet their lawyers, they learn that their case is complicated by discrimination against blacks, and at the same time, Matt talks with Senator McKillian about testifying against his partner in exchange for his freedom. Matt thinks about his next step that night and makes a phone call. Matt agrees and testifies against his accomplices, and the next day, Bernard talks to Killian and listens to his proposal in exchange for an immunity deal, in exchange for confirming Matt's testimonies, or he can say what he wants and go to jail. In the end, Bernard decides to express what he has been holding in his heart for years and talk about racial discrimination in the country. Soon after, Bernard and Joe are confiscated and sentenced to prison while Matt is acquitted several years later. They leave the prison walls and find Unios strangely waiting for them, that they seem happy even after losing all their wealth. Then it turns out that there is a different scenario that Joe reveals that they have properties next to each other in the Bahamas. When Eunice wonders how it happened, the scene takes us back to the call Matt made the night before his testimony. We know that he called Bernard and told him about his deal with the senator, and also apologized to him. In return, Bernard asked him to do him a favor before the government could confiscate his property. The film ends after we know that the two partners will start new projects and investments away in the Bahamas. And this is the end of the video. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and support us with like and suggest a movie you would like to recap it.